They are handpicked to be the most fearful, ruthless, and brutal executioners of the Nazi ideology. They are the linchpins in a system with a sole purpose to torture, kill, and make its victims' last days on Earth as miserable as possible. They are the commandants of the SS concentration, labor, and extermination camps. I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is a World War II in real-time gallery of Nazi camp commandants. Concentration camps become a tool for repressing political enemies immediately after German Führer Adolf Hitler's power grab in 1933. While the system is somewhat ad hoc at first, it eventually grows into a series of camps, all following the same terror, suppression, and torture system. Its leading architect is Theodor Eicke, whom Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler has discharged from a psychiatric asylum where he is under evaluation for aggression issues to run the Dachau concentration camp. In that role, Eicke revises the disciplinary and penal code. He creates a lawless state within a state, legitimizing anything the camp commandant orders as a means to achieve the goals of Nazism as the sole ideology of Germany. Unlike any other systems of incarceration or penal systems, instead of rules and regulation, it is based on dogmatic credos like tolerance means weakness. Realizing this, there will be a ruthless grip there where, in the interests of the fatherland, it appears necessary. Eicke's goal is not rehabilitation, re-indoctrination, or punishment. It is simply intimidation by breaking down his prisoners until they are either mentally shattered or dead. He achieves it by instituting absolute terror, back-breaking useless manual labor, corporal punishment, and torture within a framework of discipline based on arbitrary punishment for rules that are unclear or don't even exist. We've covered Eicke's model in more detail in a previous video, link is in the description. In any case, when Eicke assumes the role of inspector of the concentration camps, this system of his becomes the modus operandi of all camp commandants. One of them is Hans Loritz. He's a World War I veteran and was a high-ranking police officer who in 1934 requests to become the commandant of concentration camp Esterwegen, which he models closely on Eicke's Dachau blueprint. From 1936, he runs Dachau itself. One historian describes him as an actual demon for the notorious crimes he commits. Fritz Arnold, an Esterwegen survivor, calls him a beast disguised as a human. An avid Nazi, Loritz is disgusted with political and racial opponents and shuns no methods to enforce his rule. Karl Ludwig Schächer, a Dachau survivor, recalls one moment under Loritz's control. 7 prisoners were given 25 blows of the rod each. The company leaders took turns meting out the blows. Each one of them sought to impress the new boss. Loritz introduced a new variation to corporal punishment. There was to be a break after every 2 blows. This extended the time it took to execute the punishment and greatly intensified the pain suffered by the victim. During the war, he will be one of the commandants of the Sachsenhausen camp, where his terror will devolve into mass murder, leading to the death of tens of thousands. But outside the camp system, Hans Loritz has a social life filled with friendships, business relations, marriages, and affairs. He is the embodiment of how the camps are portrayed to the outside world, nationally and internationally. Model institutions run by Nazi gentlemen for the betterment of the nation. One Dachau taxi chauffeur tells one of his passengers about him. What a fine man Commandant Loritz was, and what splendid fellows the SS men were, and what a pleasant life the prisoners led. Oh, one can be sure of that. But even inside the SS, there is the feeling that a certain order must prevail, an idea that clashes with the system of lawlessness and buddy politics inherent to all of the Nazi Party. Another personal protege of Eicke, Karl Otto Koch, illustrates the absurdity of this code. He is Loritz's successor at Estevig and later becomes the first commandant of Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, and Majdanek concentration camps in succession. Beyond the usual brutality, Koch is a simple thief, and an officer of the SS Order Police, Josias Sowaldeck und Permont, rightfully accuses him of stealing from Jewish prisoners in Buchenwald, and Koch is briefly incarcerated. But Himmler has him released, and Eike's successor, Oswald Pohl, promises to do a better job protecting him. But finally, Koch is relieved of his function as Majdanek commandant after 86 Soviet POWs escape. But Waldeck und Permont continues his corruption case against Koch. He finds that he had killed 2 German prisoners in Buchenwald who had helped him cure his syphilis, which he wanted to stay secret. Koch is put on trial, during which he states, "I don't have an explanation for my actions. I was being spoiled by my bosses. Everything I imagined and did was good. I reaped nothing but praise and honor. This has risen to my head. I became a megalomaniac." It is under Loritz and Koch that many of the future concentration camp commandants are brought up. The most notorious of them might be Franz Sierras. He is a 12-year Bavarian professional of the German Reichswehr when he joins the SS in 1936 as an instructor. In February 1939, he takes command of what will become the most deadly concentration camp in the entire system, extermination camps excluded. Mauthausen in Austria, built around an old stone quarry. He will also remain in charge till the very end in May 1945 and turn it into his own hellscape. The camp is used for grade 3 prisoners, political non-desirables, felons, and POW officers. They are deemed incorrigible, who are not welcome to resume life in the German Reich in any way or form, and are expected to not survive the camp. Sierras takes Eike's model to crack the prisoners to even lower levels, creating what can only be described as Dante's Inferno on Earth. Under his command, a creativity in torture is unleashed that is hard to even imagine. Prisoners are driven into electric fences, injected with petrol. Physical labor is used to wear out the prisoners as an extermination technique. They have to carry large blocks of granite up the 186 steps of the stairs of death, often multiple times a day. Inmates are whipped and shot at indiscriminately. Some are forced to make parachute jumps without a parachute from a 50-meter high cliff where they either get smashed to pieces on the stones below or drown in the water-filled quarry. In the Mauthausen subcamp Gusen, weaker inmates are at one point murdered during the so-called Badeaktion, in which up to 300 prisoners are exposed to ice-cold water under high pressure, causing them to die. But as the Nazi reign of terror grows, so do the needs of the camps, and this requires versatile commandants that go beyond the base brutality of Sierras. One of them is Rudolf Höss, a veteran of the Great War, member of the Nazi Party already since 1922, and a convicted far-right political murderer. In 1928, after serving half of his 10-year sentence for being the ringleader in the murder of another member of the nationalist militia he's part of, he becomes an activist in the Nazi Party. He eventually becomes personally acquainted with Himmler, and in 1934 he joins the SS, where he serves under Eike, Loritz, and Koch consecutively. After excelling as part of the SS death squads commanded by Eike during the invasion of Poland, in May 1940 he becomes commandant of a new concentration camp at Auschwitz, or Auschwitz, in occupied Poland. He settles here on the campgrounds in a villa with his wife and 4 children. A 5th child is born at the camp in 1943. His children will remember him as a kind and loving father, but as commandant, Höss proves himself to be a ruthless career bureaucrat. His mantra is, only one thing is valid, orders. His ambition, sense of duty to command, and disregard for others' lives fits right into the changing needs of the camp system. As Germany now occupies most of Europe, which is filled with countless perceived ethnic and political enemies, the concentration camps increase in size and number. In addition, after the attack on the USSR, tens of thousands of the millions of Soviet POWs are also incarcerated in dedicated labor sections of the SS camps. The concentration camp system as a whole now gradually develops into a business model for economic exploitation. For the incarcerated, this means liquidation through forced labor. However, in the second half of 1941, the concentration camps are not yet a destination for Europe's Jews or other minorities. But already at the beginning of mass shootings of Jews in the East in the summer of 1941, Himmler approaches Huss to discuss a more efficient and less messy solution for mass murder to solve the Jewish problem. After experiments with a variety of gases to kill Soviet POWs, in September 1941, Huss settles on a slightly altered pesticide gas based on hydrogen cyanide, Zyklon B. Although many other SS men carry out experiments with murder by gas, it is Huss's choice, combined with the logistics of transporting the victims directly to the gas chambers by train developed at Chełmno, that becomes the main method of murder during the Holocaust. When, in December 1941, the decision is taken that all of Europe's Jews must die, and the mass murders by gas begin as part of Operation Reinhard, Huss is determined to turn Auschwitz into a model camp, integrating the three ideas of concentration, labor, and extermination into one unified camp complex. The first camp is expanded, and the third camp, called Monowitz, is added. The already existing second camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, is transformed into a dedicated gassing facility in early 1942. Huss's ambition is not unique. In general, the camp commandants are driven by ideology, bureaucratic zeal, and a total complacency with suffering as a means to gain results and satisfy their superiors. Medical doctor Imfried Ebel, for example, a convinced Austrian Nazi from the times of his studies, he is forbidden to take up work as a doctor in Austria because of his active involvement in Nazi political violence. Instead, he leaves for Germany, where he joins the Aktion T4 euthanasia program in a leading position. The program is there to kill the mentally ill and the handicapped. Eventually, he becomes commandant of the Treblinka extermination camp, where he obsesses over gaining results to the point where the system can't handle it anymore. One of his officers testifies. He was very ambitious. It was said that he ordered more transports than could be processed in the camp. That meant that trains had to wait outside the camp because the occupants of the previous transport had not yet all been killed. At the time, it was very hot, and as a result of the long wait inside the transport trains and the intense heat, many people died. At that time, whole mountains of bodies lay on the platform. Words fail to capture the horror that opens up when you look at just this small selection of commandants in the SS camp system. Many of them, almost all of them, will either die during the war or face the death penalty when it is over. Before then, several of them will be given a chance to explain themselves as part of their trials, and to a man, they will fail to provide any explanation beyond that they were just following orders. An explanation that is, as we have seen here, a lie, but also incomprehensible, unacceptable, and unjustifiable. What we can say is that they were one of the driving forces in a system that gradually dehumanized not just the victims, but the perpetrators themselves, the people that had to fight them, and the entire world. And it began with a simple fallacy, that my rights have more value than yours. It began with words. Never forget.